Okay, so Doug, just let's talk a little bit about the book and what we would expect to read in the book.
You know, in total, it's a 50-year mystery. It was, but what I do is I go through. I was born in Scottsbluff, and my parents had always lived in Wyoming, but I was down here to my grandparents for Thanksgiving holiday, and for Thanksgiving dinner, and that's why I was born down here. But the rest of my time, you know, I lived in Wyoming, in the LaGrange area, and I talk a little bit in the book about, you know, rural western Nebraska. My mother was born on a farm in Banner County. My dad and all his siblings were born east of LaGrange, where I live now. And then of course I went to school at LaGrange. We had some great basketball teams back in those years, and there were 10 in my graduating class, and I pay tribute to the teachers and the coaches and stuff that had such a profound influence on us as kids. And then I received an athletic scholarship to play basketball at the University of Wyoming as a freshman. But then I was going to be redshirted because there was a guy named Flynn Robinson coming down the pike, and of course he became a professional basketball player. But I wasn't there for Flynn's performance. But I transferred to John Brown University in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and I played basketball there and received a great education and graduated with a degree in education, and came back to Wyoming ready to live the dream, and got my first teaching and coaching job at Veteran, Wyoming, and which is southwest of Torrington. And after 1 year, this was before the lottery, I got drafted. And in those years, the president had, you know, it was a presidential appointment in each county, and they were charged with the task of filling a quota, and I was one of them that got drafted. And because I had a college education, I decided I'd want to try to fly jets or something, and I had one eye that kept me from doing that, and so I enlisted in the Marine Corps, went to Officer Candidate School. My reasoning was that was the shortest Officer Candidate program, and then that's I spent a little bit of time at the beginning of the book talking about the rural values that we were taught, and how that had a profound effect on my service as a military officer. I was once I got out of Officer Candidate School, they had a base team there at Quantico, Virginia, and I went down and tried out for that, and I got on that team, and they used it for recruiting and for some up close and personal contact with anti-war demonstrators. But I would go to basic school during the day and then practice at night and play ball on the weekends. And so at the end of the first season, the commanding general of the base, his staff contacted me and asked me if I'd be interested in staying and playing another year. And I said, yeah. So he had orders cut, which was legal. You could stay and play 1 year, but then you had to go on. So I stayed another year and basically was a jock. Played basketball, had temporary additional duties, but as the second lieutenant, I wasn't being prepared anything other than playing basketball for what was waiting in Vietnam. And
this was what year?
That was in 1966 and 67. I was there, I went in 1965, was there and played basketball that season in 1966, then was held over a year, played basketball the season of 1967, and then I went across to Vietnam and arrived there in July of 67.
With that being in the later part of the war, certainly you had to be well aware of what was going on over there.
Well, you know, quite frankly, I never even thought about military service in college, just never paid any attention to it, even though I was in ROTC in Laramie my freshman year, but after that, I hadn't really given it any thought. And then when 1967 rolled around and I had orders to Vietnam, I started paying more attention. I mean, I was aware of it a little bit back on the East Coast, but I don't know that there's any real reality to it all. It was happening so fast, and the buildup was happening so fast. And when I when I got to Vietnam, there were end of 1967, beginning of 1968, there were over 500,000 people there, military personnel. So when I arrived, I was assigned to 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, which was a infantry battalion, and I made first lieutenant on the way over there because that was just a perfunctory thing of 18 months in grade as a second lieutenant. You made first lieutenant. So I get there as a brand new first lieutenant, and I had done nothing really but play basketball. And they looked at my record, and they looked kind of like you did just now, with shock. And so they said, well, we're going to keep you around the battalion headquarters and try to teach you some things you're going to need to know. And they did that, and then in October, the first week of October, I was supposed to go to hotel company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, to be an executive officer, and hopefully they could teach me more. And but that was supposed to happen on a Thursday, and on Wednesday, the commanding officer of Echo Company was killed, and he had just taken over on Monday of that week. And so there was a pretty high mortality rate amongst officers, infantry officers, and I was the only one left in the battalion that either wasn't already assigned. So the colonel, it was Colonel John Love, he chewed on his cigar a little bit, and he said, well, go get him, Tiger. So he made me the commanding officer of Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and I'd never been a platoon commander even.
Oh my.
And so if it hadn't been for my NCOs and staff NCOs, I think we'd have all gotten killed. And I took over Echo Company on October 7th, and actually was a commanding officer of Echo Company for 7.5 months, which was unusual in those times. One, that you lasted that long, and two, they normally, it was a 6-month assignment, but again, they just didn't have the people in personnel, you know, that we needed. So went through it 67, leading up to Tet. It became pretty obvious that's what was coming, and then of course was there for the Tet Offensive at the end of January 1968. And I write about that experience and leading up to that, and then I talk some about what the demographics were, if you will, of the Marine Corps at the beginning of 1968. And there were, I think, 81,000 Marines in country at that time. And in the first 6 months of 1968, there was a casualty rate of killed and wounded of over 42% of the Marines who were there at the beginning of 68 were killed or wounded in the next 6 months. So had a chance to lead young men in what was a pretty serious situation. But
a pretty young man yourself at the time.
Yeah, I was. You know, the interesting statistic, the old thing is, if old men had to fight the wars, there wouldn't be any. Of the total casualties in Vietnam of 58,267, not counting the missing in action, almost 40,000 of those casualties were 22 years old or younger. And of that 40,000, over 30,000 of them were 18 years old. So, and that's true of all conflicts. Young people bear the brunt of that. And so I ended out in a situation where I was ordered to reinforce 1st Battalion, 7th Marines on Operation Worth, and that was in March of 1968. And during that period of time, on the 25th of March, we found a Marine who'd been left behind, and when we tried to get his remains removed, they told us to, they didn't tell us, they ordered me to bury him, and that's why the name of my book is Bury Him. And it was an act that plagued me and my men for the rest of our lives. And so I write about that, and the mental anguish and the devastation that caused us. And then because of something was said to me by one of my former students about 4.5 years ago, Dr. Brent Kaufman, who's a veterinarian in Torrington, it inspired me to write the book. Strange set of circumstances, but that's what it's all about.
So, you're leading Echo Company there. What kind of a responsibility is that on your shoulders to have? I mean, how many, 100 and...
Well, as we were organized, you were supposed to have 220 men in a battalion, but I don't ever remember having more than about 180 because of casualties, because of sickness, that sort of thing.
But, and what was your age at that time? Maybe
I was 24.
24, yeah.
And the way the Vietnam War was carried out, you spent a lot of time operating on your own as a company. It wasn't the classical infantry deployment where you operated as battalions, even though we were part of 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. The headquarters was near Da Nang, and then we were deployed out individually in a lot of cases. And so as a company commander, you made a lot of life and death decisions every day.
Sure.
And of course you had the responsibility of coordinating close air support from fixed wing aircraft, from helicopters, naval gunfire, artillery. You were responsible for resupply, and obviously responsible for medevacs. You were in a position where young men depended on you to, for everything they needed every day, and of course that's what made it so devastating. In
your command structure, were you just given a directive to take care of this piece of the puzzle, of a bigger puzzle, that your objective then would be to go out and send men out to do these tasks that would lead to completing that portion of the puzzle, or how did that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the early days of my command, we had a TAOR, Tactical Area of Responsibility, and in that area we're responsible for a lot of things, for patrolling, for trying to prevent rocket attacks on the Da Nang Air Base, and also interaction with the civilians. And back then it was called winning the hearts and minds of the people. So it was a very, very difficult situation from the standpoint of communication, because I didn't speak any Vietnamese, nor did anybody in the company, and they didn't speak hardly any English. And so that was a constant interchange and interaction with the civilians, unfortunately, of which many of them suffered horribly. That's just the collateral damage of war. And I try to make that point early on in the book, that if you've seen the movie Patton, you might remember he was speaking to the cadets at West Point about the object of war. And he points out in there that, in fact, he's attributed with saying that the object of war is not to die for your country. The object of war is to make sure some other dumb poor bastard dies for his. And that really is what it's all about. And that reality, I think, is one of the more taxing things for you as a leader, especially with the values we have for life. And I never ever get used to killing people. And I think most people in infantry units would tell you the same thing. But that's what it's all about.
You touched a little bit about the war protesters at the time. What was your experience like when you came back?
Well, I guess I'd back up and say, that was back in the days of the little transistor radios that people had, and the troops all had them, and that was one of the problems you had if they'd much rather listen to the radio sometime if they could, rather than do what we were supposed to be doing. But we heard Jane Fonda, on Hanoi radio station, with her propaganda. And so that was a real morale problem. But when we got back, fortunately for me, I came back to Wyoming. And even though it was much more insulated from the anti-war activities, I came back to law school at the University of Wyoming. I had my brake lines cut on my car. The military guys, it was easy to see, from your haircut and stuff, but that's the way it was. So most of us hid out.
Do you feel now, decades after all of this experience, that maybe the perception of those who served is different now than it was then?
It seems to be. It's been amazing how there's been a resurgence, at least, of interest in the Vietnam War. And there have been so many things told about it that aren't realistic and, quite frankly, not true. That's one of the things that I tried to accomplish in my book. And just tell it like it really was.
I mean, maybe Hollywood is a little bit to fault for that, the misconceptions.
And books have been written to sensationalize it, and it's a horrible misconception, but that's not what this book's about. It's just about the realities.
All right. Well, I think that's plenty for us to kind of kick it off. Now, when is the book actually out or available?
There's a slip there in the book that gives you the website that's been created for me, and that'll be active Friday.
Okay.
And the book is being offered in hardcover as well as softcover, and that can be purchased through Amazon. And the website is real interactive. All you have to just click on it, and it'll tell you how to go about it. I don't know enough about technology to do all that, but I've hired it done, and so it's supposed to work. In fact, if you after I'm gone, if you wanted to try to go and bring the website up, it should pop right up. And this lady that created it in Colorado is an expert in the field. And the other thing about the book, as it came together, some of the strangest things happened. You would never, you just think, wow, maybe I was supposed to have written this, As an example, about a year and a half ago, the phone rang, and the voice on the phone said, is this Doug Chamberlain? I said, yes, it is. And he said, this is Gabe. And I thought, that's strange. There's a Gabe Reese that lives on LaGrange as a former student, but I said, Gabe who? And he said, Gabe Quinones. And I said, boy, that name's familiar, but I can't remember who you are. And he said, I was your radio operator on Operation Allenbrook.
It come back to you right then?
And 48 years later, he called me because something had been bothering him. And so that was just one of a lot of coincidences made me believe that I probably should write the book.
And your timing of releasing this book and kicking it off right before Veterans Day, obviously, that's a little thought went into that as well.
Well, yeah, but I didn't really plan it that way so much, but I've learned so many hard lessons trying to write a book. Have you ever tried to write one?
No.
And they all now say, well, that's the easy part. Marketing, that's the tough part. But it was just, well, I'll back up. Memorial Day weekend, this past one of my men sent me a YouTube of Trace Adkins singing a song called Semper Fi. And he was singing it at 29 Palms, California, where there's a Marine base there. And so I listened to it, and the words just fit exactly with my book. And I have a chapter called Semper Fi, and it's on page 216. The lyrics are, and so I thought, boy, I really want to use those words in my book. Little did I know, I now know that there were 3 guys that wrote that. Trace Adkins and 2 other guys, and so they all have filed for copyright protection. And what those guys do is they normally sell those to companies who resell them for a profit. And so the problem was we couldn't find the companies, all 3 companies. We could find the 2 guys, but Trace Adkins, the company that held his copyright, we couldn't find them. So it's taken us 4 months to locate those. So I really planned on this happening sooner, but maybe that was all part of a greater plan. Maybe it's best that this is the way it came out. But it really caused us a scramble. I didn't want to miss Veterans Day. I wanted it to be part of Veterans Day, but I never dreamed it was going to be coming up the week before. And and then another place, I have a chapter called Cool, Clear Water. You remember the old Western song
Oh, sure.
about that?
You bet.
Well, I wanted to use that first phrase in there. That was written in 1934. Cost me $250 to get the copyright clearance to use one phrase. But hopefully those are things that'll add to the reader's understanding and enjoyment. And I tried not to put anything in the book that somebody else, some of my men didn't verify. I mean, my perspective of things obviously was mine, but as a factual matter, I tried not to put anything in there factually that somebody else couldn't verify. And so those are all things that I was concerned about, authenticity. And I have read portions of a couple of books that people have written about Vietnam that, quite frankly, to me were insulting. They tried to sensationalize it, and they talk about having sex with the villagers, and those sort of things happened, but there wasn't anything glamorous about that. I mean, I was never aware of any raping of people or anything like that, but I relate how shortly after I took over the company, one morning, the village elders showed up at the wire and wanted to talk to Honcho, it was me. And they told me that Linda had baby Marine. That's what they said. Linda had baby Marine. Well, I didn't know who Linda was. But when I was finally dug back through it, there was one of the Marines in the company before I was there had a consensual relationship with this villager girl, and she became pregnant. And so she had the baby the night before, apparently, and they showed up to tell me Linda had baby Marine, and they wanted the father to know that. Well, the father had rotated home like 4 months before, so it was and of course I try to address it in the problem.
Oh my gosh, what would you do with a situation like that? Do you?
Well, that's an Amerasian child, and those children were just horribly mistreated. I understand in the readings I've done that those were some of the first people the North Vietnamese killed were those Amerasian children.
There was nothing we could do
nothing that I knew of, and you know, it was just a brand new command that I had. I mean,
Was fraternization just frowned on, or was it actually ordered?
well,
No fraternization with the locals? Or?
me as a company commander, it was prohibited, but obviously someone who preceded me maybe didn't.
Well, I mean, you can't.
I mean, I did give you
yeah.
an example. I tell this about in the book. The first night that I was there, my company gunny, who was a staff sergeant, he didn't even have, you know, it again was how short we were personnel, but he was very upset at what had been going on. So we went around and did whole checks and everything else, and a bunch of thumping went on, and boy, that was something I had never seen either. But he was lining people out, and we went to a culvert that was dug back in the ground, and he shined a flashlight in there, and there's a couple of Vietnamese, but obviously we called gooks, a couple of gooks in there, and they were giggling, and what he had told me was that these gooks had been crawling under the wire, coming in, and they would wait in that culvert, you know, and to have sex for money or sea rations or whatever. So, of course, we took them out of there, and I took them up to the highway because our position was at the Esso plant north of Da Nang, and opened the wire and let them out. Fired a few rounds over the head and told them if they ever came back, kill them, and that stopped that. But all that happened because somebody in command ahead of me allowed it to, you know, and that guy became a colonel in the Marine Corps.
Well, you never know what's going to happen, but you had to be pretty hardcore to establish yourself as the man that's in charge here. And I mean, you seem like a really nice guy, but I'm sure you were pretty hard. All Marine officers that I've known in the past have been pretty hardcore.
You know, it as I said, it was a life-changing experience, but the thing that you had to remember more than anything is people's lives depended on the decision that you made. And even though the decisions that I had to make weren't maybe popular with the men, they always knew that I was doing it, you know, for their well-being. And of course, I had the full support of the staff NCOs. They knew I was supposed to have been done, but you know, young Marines are any different than young Army soldiers. You know, if you let them wander around, they will. And the problem with that is you'll get them killed if you're not careful.
Well, I know an NCO respects an officer who has that kind of allowing them to do their jobs.
Yeah. And but they hadn't been allowed to, and that's why that first night going around, man. I mean, we walked up to a hole. There's 2 Marines in there, both asleep, and we reached down, took their weapons, took their flares or grenades, everything, and they were just out. So, and he told me that this is the kind of stuff that's going on. So then I nudged one of them with my boot, and he woke up and kind of startled him. I said, "Who's supposed to be on guard here?" And he said, "That guy is." The one I nudged had been there over there for, the gun, he said 6 months. This other guy, brand new. And so woke him up. And so Gunny said, "Who's supposed to be on watch here?" And this new guy said, he admitted that he was. And so my mind was racing, so I just said, "Well, I think," I said, "this other guy," I said, the Marine, I said, "I think I'd be pretty upset if I knew this guy just put my life at risk." Of course, he put all of our lives at risk, but so he hauls off and punches this other guy. They're in the hole. And when he does, boy, this new guy, he just came uncorked, and he started just knocking the crap out of the one that was been there long. Well, that really pissed the guy off. So he reaches down there and he grabs the guy that was supposed to have been on watch. dragged him up out of that hole. I just pounced the living crap out of him. I mean, what you would call an ass kick in an immense proportion. And when he's done with him, he dragged the other one up and
gave him a little tune
because he couldn't whip the other guy. And so then we put the guy back in the hole that was legitimately asleep. Gave him the rifles, gave him everything. And we told that other guy to go out there and stand in front of the hole about 20 yards. And we told the guy in the hole and said, okay, now when you think he's learned his lesson, you let him back in the hole with you. And we came back like 2 hours later. He still just got excited. But yeah, boy, if something would have happened, I'd have been court-martialed, you know. I mean.
Well, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't.
One day, you know, the one trouble we had with the M16 was, with that selector, they would never, ever look at it to see if it was on safe or not. You know, they had just gotten used to just pick it up, pull the trigger. So one morning, we're dug in up on a ridge, and this is down southwest Strang, and we had one of those John Wayners show up, you know, from new recruit. He was gonna kill everything, you know, the mood. So, give them all the same safety lectures and everything. And so we're walking out of where we were dug in, and I had my radio operator behind me, and he was going to be in platoon, you know, bringing up the rear. He picks that M16 up and just pulls the trigger to see if it was on safe, and it was on automatic. And of course, you know how fast those things fired. I mean, he fired a magazine of ammo before you could even blink an eye, and those rounds, I had one radio, well, I had 4 radio operators, but the one was right behind me, and then the second one in line, the rounds went right between them. And it was so close, he was so close to us that my radio operator right behind me got little bitty slivers of metal in his butt.
Oh, my.
You know how tiny bits.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, I had no idea what to do, but it pissed me off so bad. I just took his rifle away from him, gave it to his platoon commander, and I said, when you think he's learned the lesson, give him his rifle back. Made him walk all day without a rifle. And boy, you talk about praying. I prayed about every hour. Nothing would happen.
You have a sidearm?
No, I had him totally disarmed. And I told his platoon commander, you know, privately, I said, boy, if anything happens,
yeah, get him a weapon quick.
And, but desperate times required desperate measures. So the guy who was our weapon safety NCO, that night we're digging in, what do you suppose he did? The weapon safety NCO picked up his own rifle and pulls the trigger. And it was on semi-automatic, at least he only fired 1 round. The same day. So what do I do then? So
you give him the same treatment?
No, I told him, I said, start digging. And he dug all night. We had moved into a real mountainous area, rock. He was digging all night, those rocks. You know, you could hear him clanking around all night, and the gooks, probably the only reason they didn't hit us that night was because they could hear that going on in there. We were crazy.
Wondering what was going on.
So, you know, those are just some of the stories I relate. But I didn't pull any punches. I mean, if something would have happened to that kid, I definitely would have been court-martialed.
Yeah, well, yeah, leaving him out there.
But what do you do? Because we've told them and told them and told them and told them and told them, you know, and accidental discharges were one of the biggest problems we had. I
know, of course, I was in like 10 years later, 77, 78 was when I went through tank school there and whatnot, but they talked a lot about the lessons learned from Vietnam when I was there, and they still had the M16, but they never let us use it on automatic.
It was a horrible piece of weaponry.
It was that one time in training, we were allowed to put it on automatic just to see what it was like. But after that, it had to be either it was just on lock or a semi. You couldn't have it on
all of my training, all of it was done with M14s. I never even saw an M16 until I was in Treasure Island. I was there for about 36 hours, and they said, "Here, take this," and gave me a magazine and he said, "Go fire it." And while I had that company, in the 7.5 months, they came out twice, took all of our rifles, gave us all different ones, just trying to get some of the work. And so I talk about the military-industrial complex in that book. And that's how that crap happens, in my opinion. Had another kid, and he was a black kid, doesn't make a difference, but he was a black kid, young black kid, nice kid, but he obviously spent some time thinking. And he shows up one day, Corman brought him over to me. The end of his finger shot off. How'd that happen? Well, I was sitting down, and I had my hand on the trigger, and I had the rifle pointed over there, and I just happened to have my trigger finger of my other hand over the end of the barrel, and it went off. I said, "Really?" And it looked like, I'm not kidding, it looked like it had been surgically removed.
Oh my.
So,
sure,
I said to the corpsman, I said, "Can you bandage that up?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, because the kid said, he said he needed to be medevaced. I said, "You're not going anywhere." "Well, I can't fire my rifle." I said, "Use a different finger." And so there again.
You think it was intentional?
Oh yeah, sure.
Try and get out.
He
was looking for a ticket home.
Ticket out of there.
Gee whiz.
You know, if he'd have blown it, if he shot himself through the hand or something, then it'd been a different thing. We saw. I didn't see it happen, but I sat on a court-martial. I actually sat on a court-martial in Vietnam. The weapons safety corporal for the whole battalion, probably given the weapons safety training on a 45 caliber pistol 500 times. He was, of course, in the battalion there, but he and his buddy went back to get pay for payday, because those guys, I didn't allow my guys to have any money, because the only thing they'd do with it is buy drugs out there in the villages. You know. But anyway, they go get the money, come back, and you know how to clear a 45. I'm sure they still taught you that.
Oh yeah,
raised pistol.
I don't have one now, but I want a 1911 bad.
Yeah, but you know the old raised pistol procedure. Don't grab it around the muzzle. For some reason, he went to clear that thing, had it in his hand, pushed the slide back. Of course, when the barrel hits his palm, realized he made a mistake. Turn loose of it, and of course, when you do that, it snaps forward. It fires 99 out of 100 times. Shot his best friend in the heart right beside him, killed him. And he was so distraught. We court-martialed him. I mean, all the agony in the world doesn't bring that guy back. We busted him to private, and he, as soon as he got out of the line company, he obviously was on a suicide mission, trying to get himself killed, and he got himself shot up pretty bad. Got sent out, but you know, it's just heartbreaking to have to do that. But oftentimes, as you just mentioned earlier, you know, you can't just because a person's an officer or some person's a staff NGO. There are certain things that they got to be held accountable for.
Yeah. Tragic as it may be sometimes, something like that.
And, you know, I think of those, obviously it bothers me a lot, those sort of examples do, or I would have forgotten them. My sister said to me, she said one day, one of my sisters said, and I sent her to look over. because all my siblings were dead other than her. And I said, I just wanted you to have this. And because in our in our family, I was regarded as being really strange, you know. But anyway, she said, "How did you remember all that?" And I said, "It's not hard to remember when you live it every day." And for me, Dave, that's what the book's about.